socio.
Dobar dan I dobrodošli na četvrti I ujedno I posljednji dan.
Good morning and welcome to the fourth and last day of Privacy Week. My name is Nastasia Stojanovic and I would like to greet all those who are present here and those who are online following us on our YouTube channel. At the very beginning, I would just make a couple of technical remarks as we did that in the past. If you want to follow the English version of our program today, you can do it on your YouTube channel, and also you can do it for Serbian on the second channel with a link. In live chat on YouTube, as in the previous days, you can ask questions and make comments for our panelists, and in the part for the discussion we will try to convey everything and to get adequate answers to your questions. And our panel today is called Scrutiny and Ethics in the Use of Artificial Intelligence, and the moderator will be Vukašin Petrovic on behalf of the DTI Institute, and we will hear Ms. Cecile Scott on behalf of the Dutch DPA, Dutch Protection Office, before I give the floor to him.
I would like to start saying that I'm sorry I can't participate online during your panel discussion, but anyway, I'm more than happy to provide this introduction. At the Dutch Data Protection Authority, we have established a program on monitoring algorithms and AI. I will tell you something about the background of this program and the way we organized this task. In December 2021, we imposed a fine of 2.75 million euros on our tax administration for discriminatory and unlawful data processing. For many years, the tax administration processed data on the dual nationality of childcare benefit applicants for the purpose of combating fraud, even though this data was not necessary. For 1.4 million people, the Dutch tax administration registered their dual nationality. It used applicants' nationality as an indicator to automatically designate whether an application was risky or not. The data was not necessary for this purpose. I would like to quote our chair, Aleid Wolfsen, about this fine. He said, "The government has exclusive responsibility for a lot of things. People don't have a choice. They are forced to allow the government to process their personal data. And that's why it's crucial that everyone can have absolute confidence that this processing is done properly. That the government doesn't keep and process unnecessary data about individuals. And that there is never any element of discrimination involved in an individual's contact with the government. That went horribly wrong at the tax authority with all associated consequences. This case showed us that unlawful processing by means of an algorithm led to a serious violation of the data protection law. And in the Netherlands, this was a wake-up call, not only for the government, but also for us to expand our supervisory tasks on the use of algorithms and AI. And last year, we invested in strengthening our regulatory supervisory tasks on algorithms and AI, and we set up a program in close cooperation with our Ministry of Digitalization to enhance algorithm and AI supervision, together with other supervisory agencies. Amongst them are, for example, the Authority of Consumers and Markets, the Netherlands Institute for Human Rights, and the Dutch Authority for Digital Infrastructure. Together with these organizations, we will coordinate cross-sectoral activities in the field of monitoring the development of algorithms and AI. And within the Dutch Data Protection Authority, we have set up a new directorate for coordinating algorithms. And we started 3 new tasks. First, to flag high-risk use of algorithms and AI. Second, to enhance the sharing of knowledge between various supervisory agencies. And finally, to intensify further cooperation between these agencies. This year, we expect that the new European AI Act will be adopted, and that this will determine the future of cultivation of the development of AI in Europe in a way where human rights are leading. It will be a challenge to organize effective enforcement of both AI Act and the GDPR in regard to the use of algorithms and AI. And in this respect, we think that it's crucial to cooperate closely with all supervisory agencies involved. Up until this day, the victims of our child care benefits affair are still fighting for their rightful compensation. It's going to take many years to do these people justice. And we feel that it's our duty to prevent this situation from ever happening again. And to conclude my story, I wish you a fruitful discussion on the subject. Thank you for your attention.
I would like to thank Ms. Katz for her presentation and for allocating the time to address us in this way, since she wasn't able to come. And I will give the floor to Mr. Vukašin Petrovic to present panelists. Thank you. I would like to thank and welcome everybody who is watching us here in the room and on the internet. And it is my pleasure to talk about scrutiny and ethics of the use of artificial intelligence with Ms. Brankica Jankovic, Commissioner for the Protection of Equality, Danilo Čurčić from the organization A11, and Sanja Stankovic from the OSCE. And I also hope that during this session we will be joined by Mr. Vladimir Pak, who is representing the AI Committee in the Council of Europe. And I would like to start this discussion with Ms. Brankica Jankovic, Commissioner for the Protection of Equality. And I would like to ask Ms. Jankovic at the beginning, when we talk about artificial intelligence, are you an optimist or skeptical? And what is the use of AI that you prefer, and what you're afraid, and which use is something that you're afraid of? I believe that the effects of AI are much more important for society and much stronger than we realize and discuss it in the public. And this is a great opportunity during the Privacy Week to talk about one of the most important topics that we are yet to talk about, because during the COVID-19 pandemic, we witnessed certain dangers, and we also witnessed the power of modern technologies. It has grown, and AI has a great role there, and it will play an even greater role in the future. And it has its own risks and potentials, so positive and negative sides. Bearing in mind that these violation of rights by algorithms are more difficult to identify when compared to the discrimination by a discriminator or a natural person. So very often we are not aware of some different treatment or any violation of right, and there is a tendency for an algorithm to affect many more people once it is used than when people decide on an individual basis. As it happened in the social protection system, and that happened in the Netherlands. We heard about that from the representative of the Dutch Data Protection Office, and I know that Mr. Ćurčić will mention what happened here in our country when the law on the social card entered into force and its implementation started. And I don't think that the answer to question about of me being optimistic or skeptical is not of any relevance. We have artificial intelligence, it's already used, and it doesn't really matter whether somebody is an optimist or skeptical about that, and nobody can stop this rapid development and advancement of science and technology. We can just discuss how to use it for the greater good. And my last impression is related to the chat systems, how far it's gone, and the creation of the textual contents. So somebody passed a final exam for MBA from the Wharton University. So this was an illustration for me how this can change things in the educational sphere, and we have to think about that seriously. And there are also effects on the labor market, and we discussed that during an event organized by the OSCE mission. And I saw some data from the McKinsey Institute, and they said that the AI can add value of 16% to the global economy until 2030. And when it comes to impact analysis on the economy, measuring impact is very important. And there are several questions: how this technology will affect the labor market, whether it will create jobs or cause layoffs. And according to the estimate, if we take into account that we have a dynamic automation process in place, after affected manpower with the lower qualification, now it's moving to those with the medium level qualifications, and it will move on. And the assessment is that about 70% of jobs in Europe will be replaced by AI or some other innovative technology. And that shows us that Yuval Harari, one of the greatest philosophical minds of our era, shook the world. In his speech in Davos, he reminded the world about digital. Actually, he talked about digital dictatorships, new forms of colonialism, use of artificial intelligence. His warning is for the future, but there are certain things that in my view, resemble that. And according to the World Economic Forum, automation is the use of AI systems. And it's supposed to create 133 million jobs before 2022. That was an estimate of one of the World Economic Forums, and 75 million should disappear. On a net basis, it's 58 million jobs created by AI. So according to the current data, things are moving in that direction, but that forecast was until 2022. It remains to be seen whether the forecasts were accurate. And from ZipRecruiter, we heard that AI created 3 times more jobs in 2018 than eliminating jobs. And that report says that demand for people with the skills in artificial agency grew by 379% in the period between 2016 and 2018. So it's not surprising. It's just a question of human capacity and whether human capacities, whether that amount of human capacities could be directed towards these professions. And I think these figures that I've mentioned illustrate the magnitude of the challenges that we will face. Also from the standpoint of the institution that I'm heading, while paying attention to potential cases of discrimination and gaze.
Thank you very much. This is a great introduction, and I would like us to focus more on Serbia. Mr. Ćurčić, I would like to ask you, we know that the Serbian government in December issued the ethical guidelines for the implementation and use of reliable artificial intelligence. In your opinion, how much does the government comply with its guidelines, at least when it implemented the law on social cards last year? Admittedly, the law took effect before the guidelines were adopted. Okay, if we apply the standards from the guidelines or the standards from the law on personal data protection on what is contained in the law on the social card, we will be able to see that the government has not complied with any of them when it adopted this law. The law on the social card did not respond to any of the requirements or anything that was mentioned in the ethical guidelines. So decision-making in the social card system is not transparent. We do not know how those 3 red, yellow, and green notifications are made. We do not know what the crucial information is that instructs the workers what they should do at the social centers. And it has not been fair. So if you have the social card system and the notifications that you receive cannot be caused by the beneficiary. The beneficiary receives the information that his or her what he receives or she receives is higher than what the law defines, and they cannot influence that, and nobody informs them on how this red notification was given. So if we looked at the ethical guidelines, we would be able to see that they do not match the system, the social card system, or what we currently have in the social card system. And this transparency is extremely important because we have been trying to find out for more than a year what kind of algorithm this is, and now we've reached a new stage with the Ministry of Social Affairs, which has said that the algorithm does not exist. So the new idea is that algorithms do not exist, the social cards function without any algorithms. Even when we try to get information about the way in which decisions are made under the law on personal data protection, we did not receive anything. Whatever is in the social card, if it is read, you can do nothing about it. Most of them do not even file complaints to those solutions, because those complaint procedures last much longer than what is needed for them to apply or reapply for the social card again. So there's a very clear logic for the people. They will decide rather not to complain to that decision than to wait for a year for the ministry to decide on their complaint. On the micro level, we currently have a coalition between social workers and organizations providing legal assistance. Social workers, because they have to act on the notifications, and they know personally the beneficiaries. Once they are once their services are declined, they immediately refer them to legal aid. So once we observe all this, we can see what a system, what an AI system could look like if we observe the situation with social cards. Or what would the expectations be? Because the law on the social cards is a glimpse into the future, of what the future would look like if the system as it is continued. And what is especially worrying is that the social card system and the setup of the system affects those who are the poorest and the most vulnerable in the society, those who cannot raise their voices to oppose this or to prevent the implementation of the system to their circumstances. Thank you very much. Before we include the OSCE in the discussion, Ms. Jankovic, I wanted to ask you another question as a sort of response to what Mr. Čurčić mentioned. What does your office plan to do in order to prevent the social inclusion of vulnerable groups, their marginalization and exclusion, such as pensioners, for example, and other marginalized groups? And what do you see as your role, the role of the state, and the role of social organizations in this process? I think that Danilo added fuel to the fire using this example, because I've already said what the challenges are. We do not know enough, and we're learning. And the institution that I'm heading is constantly working on the improvement of our knowledge. You've seen that the colleague from the Netherlands said that actually we couldn't hear her well, but the main stress is on coordination among all stakeholders. So I think that Danilo's example is really good. I don't have any magic to apply and answer to a question, but it's good to hear that social workers are calling civil society organizations that are working in the field and that have more, well, not experience, but knowledge, or that they call people who have technical knowledge. So it would be good to raise the capacity of us all and to include us in the developer circles while those applications, those algorithms are being created, and while they're collecting data, because transparency is extremely important. And it's important to be able to explain and to check whatever is being done. and the use of reliable AI. These are the principles. And at the very beginning of implementation, we could see that when the law on the social card was implemented, we do not have any explanations, and we cannot check the data that were used or the confidentiality of data. It turned out that this algorithm was working on its own, it seems. And I hope that we will get a strategic case from this. Mr. Čurčić and I have been talking about those cases and are still talking about those cases. And we are also working in good faith on the implementation of one of the provisions of the law on the prevention of discrimination, with the aim of ensuring that the most vulnerable are not marginalized, meaning that we have to assess the implementation of all regulations on the most vulnerable groups in the society, because in this case they were those who were the most affected, and they are sort of invisible and they cannot complain, and they do not know how to complain when such a thing happens. People thought that the greatest abuse would happen in the private sector, but actually our experience tells us that the situation is completely the opposite. We could also hear the experience from Holland and some other countries. They had social protection cases like us. I think that in Holland it was either child benefits or social welfare benefits. I don't remember which one of those it was. So it's not anything that's specific for us. In their cases, also those who were the most vulnerable were the most affected. Also, the Polish government, we have their example, and you need to show your responsibility and say, well, we're responsible, and you restore the situation. Actually, what I wanted to say is that the perception was that the biggest danger is posed by the private sector, but one of the largest AI companies, Cloudy Data Robot, presented its findings on the basis of a study conducted on different institutions. It turned out that many managers, 54% of the managers are concerned about the use of AI. They are concerned that there will be bias in the use of those systems, and they expect the national legal framework to prevent such situation. 81% of them, actually, I'm checking the figures because I've been looking at figures for days, so so it's not 54, it's 81 out of the 350 organizations. And they say that they expected the national framework to solve this, but we could all actually see that the greater risk which occurred in the public sector. We already know some of the big scandals that occurred to large tech companies, and they are not fully aware about their responsibility, but I think that without them we will not be able to solve this issue. It's encouraging to hear that private companies are very much aware of their responsibility, they're concerned, and they do not want to lose people's trust, because some of their algorithms will result in discrimination and exclusion of whole social groups, like it happened to women. There's a lot of work to do for all of us, especially human rights institutions, and we're aware of that. We're aware that we're moving forward, and we are not waiting for a case to occur in order to be able to learn. We are monitoring the situation in order to be able to respond to each such case and to protect the most vulnerable. From our point of view, it does not matter whether discrimination against somebody was actually conducted by a person or an algorithm. It's good to know that anybody can be a discriminator. And the algorithm is not working on its own. Somebody entered the data, somebody gave the order, and I'm sorry, I still do not know the terminology. So they gave the instruction that will make the algorithm make such a selection. So we can only talk about the person who actually gave such instructions. We cannot talk about something happening on its own, because people are those who are entering the prejudice and bias and giving instructions for processes. And I think that it would be good to ensure systematization as soon as possible to get a good quality system and good quality procedures for surveillance.
Great, thanks a lot. Ms. Tankovic, so far we've been discussing the use of AI in the interest of the public. And one of the main concerns that we have when we talk about artificial intelligence is how the media and how the social media use AI and how algorithms that decide on what we're to see are not serving the interest of the public. On the other hand, several studies, like the study of the Reuters University and the Oxford University study, show that young people avoid news because the pieces of news are depressive. They have a selective approach to news and avoid news about politics. So should we blame algorithm logic and AI for giving priority to contents that are not in public interest when the editorial policy of the media is not aligned with the needs of the youth and their understanding of society? So thank you for your question and thank you for the invitation, and good afternoon, good morning to all. That's one of the major topics that we are addressing, and together with the commissioner, who has been together with the OSCE when we started opening this topic in society and to motivate and include journalistic associations in these topics. So impact of the AI learning model, major platforms, because this business model and all these entities that operate according to this model are affected. The major impact actually comes from the business models of major platforms. But I would make a reference to say a couple of words about the hesitation of the audience to read or watch unpleasant news. We have this in the region as well. Prisma carried out last year a major survey about the demand and the media needs, and indicators are even more concerning there. And Byrne also carried out an analysis here how this platform environment affects the work of the media and information made available to the public, and the results are the same everywhere. And we cannot blame just the algorithm. You have the fact that the quality of news is declining, generally speaking. Also, when you speak with investigative journalists, they are often reproached for writing all the time about the corruption, and people say, well, write about some brighter topics. And algorithms that are in the underlying the systems of big platforms that dominate the production of the content, the distribution of the content, the curation of the content. So the core of their business model is increasing profits, and they do it through advertising. And you need advertisers for that, and to have more advertisers, you have to have the engagement of the audience, and you have to have such systems of recommendations. And what actually that was mentioned by the commissioner, this scope and effect of the network provide huge opportunities for access to contents, and they also enable monitoring all our searches, our online purchases. All this data is collected, exchanged, traded, sold, and it's huge capital at the disposal of the platforms. And then we have traditional media that tend to produce content of public interest. It's not only about news and not only about coronavirus, but it's also about the way how it is made available to the public, including the youth.
Oni utiču na rad medija tako što
they affect the work of the media by making media running this race with them. So as a traditional media outlet that is already depending on that platform because the content is there, it is subordinated to the dictate of the algorithm, and it's not, this editorial policy is not managed by the editor. This is managed by the algorithm who want clickbaits. So the media content of such media outlets is losing quality, and the noise in the public space is growing, and it feeds saturation of people, or oversaturation of people with news as such. And as a consequence, your trust in the media is dropping, and interest in any content, the quality falls, the possibility for the traditional media outlet to make profits, make earnings is going down, and that reduces democratic pluralism, which is the basis of any society. As for the recommendations for the improvement of the situation, we heard a recommendation from the OSCE representative for the media freedoms, and it follows previous recommendations to support independent journalism, to give priority information of public interest, and some of the recommendations address this technological situation that we live in, and we at the OSCE mission to Serbia, we're promoting that, and that is multi-sectoral work as mentioned by the commissioner. That's important for all areas where AI is used and machine learning. You have to include the civil sector, the academia, the platforms, the government, journalists and journalistic associations in this specific case. When you are trying to identify specific solutions, so when you define policies to support pluralism or media policy, you have to bear in mind the ways to promote cooperation among different stakeholders, not only at the level of policy making and regulation drafting, but in other areas to encourage the involvement of actually it involves efforts to encourage platforms to include the general public and to include different specialties like psychologists working with children, segments of the audience and so on, and to develop new outlets for the marketing of the content, curation of the content, the distribution of the content. That's what the commissioner said. You don't just produce something and distribute that and then wait to see what's going to happen. But we know that there will be consequences, and you cannot deal with them on a retroactive basis. And some mistakes can be rectified at that stage, but the damage is already huge. That's one recommendation. And another recommendation is important for our region. We don't have data, we don't have surveys or studies. We don't know how major platforms or big social media channels give preferences to their systems, how they create their algorithms. These are all small languages, so you don't have this luxury as those who speak English or Chinese, where you can test your systems based on machine learning on a huge quantity of data. So we need studies, and studies including platforms. Platforms are quite closed when it comes to their data. It's their business model that affects business operations, and they are reluctant to give that. There is a recommendation of the OSCE, and we have major expectations from the beginning of the application of Digital Service Act as of 2024. So this will be the beginning of the opening of data to researchers, to people from the civil sector, so that we can gain better insights in the choice and distribution of these contents in our area for our languages. Thank you. Daniel, that gives me the idea for the following question to you. Obviously, the key thing in the use of the AI is to ensure an inclusive decision-making process, and to ensure that marginalized groups and communities are given power to participate in designing AI. So what are the proposals from your standpoint, or lessons learned, or practices that you would propose? Also to private companies in the field of the media and the government that is providing public services. So what should they use in order to ensure that AI is used based on ethical principles?
This is quite a big question, so maybe I can repeat in bullet points like an answer. But I think the situation is like in Serbia, and I really do not want to delve into the private sector because we have no common grounds with them. I'm interested in the public sphere because of the job that I'm doing. And what is visible is the fetishism of technology by decision makers. They're saying everything will be solved through digitalization, e-citizens, e-pages, e-whatever. And a large number of people are actually excluded from getting access to those sectors. So under the circumstances that we currently have, according to the level of digital literacy, access to computers and your knowledge, we have a huge number of people who cannot benefit at all from those systems. I'm going back to the social card again. In the social card system, under the law on the social card, you have the right to inspect data, your personal data, in the administration. Do you think that any of the beneficiaries did that? Or do you think that they can get access at all to the system? So that's a solution that's inaccessible to the people to which it should pertain. And therefore such solutions where you will use technology in this way in the public sphere and achieve efficiency and cost effectiveness. This is not based on the circumstances on which this system rests. We have technology on one side, and on the other we have this material and legal segment, which refers to the social cards. So the actually IT workers set up the criterion. We can now see that some criteria were set up badly. They did not apply, for example, the principles of the law on social assistance. For example, you can use social assistance because you did some kind of seasonal work, and seasonal work is excluded from this. But the person who was doing the algorithm did not take this into account. So the first time that we saw that things were not working was when the initial beneficiaries lost the right to those benefits. And now everybody is washing their hands. They're trying to say that nobody is responsible. And you can see on the sample of 900,000 beneficiaries of the social card and the data arriving from the ministries that several million euros were saved. So it's like a parallel narrative. I'm talking about the consequences and what the situation looks like now. What we should be doing, and this does not apply only on social cards, we also had facial recognition software cases. There are different levels of vulnerability. And those who are especially vulnerable are usually not used as a model for setting up the system. So in this case, for example, if somebody has an income of 50 euros per month and lives in a makeshift house, this was not the person on the basis of whom this system was set up. So the system is set up wrong, and it's observed like a magic wand that will correct the situation completely, and that's why we have what we have right now. We are working on a better inclusion of beneficiaries, their participation, and giving them the possibility to create the system, to ask them what the system should look like. And this is something that we're working on together with the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory. We're working on citizens' assemblies with the beneficiaries, or those who cannot be the beneficiaries of the social card system. They are now giving their proposals and suggestions for this system, and on the basis of their inputs we will try to present the alternative approach to social benefits, which should take into account their perspective. And their perspective is that they do not mind the control, if we know what the control is and if it will result in a fairer distribution, which was actually the idea behind the law on the social card. And I'm talking about some of the suggestions that we talked about at the assemblies. The control would mean a more active role of social workers, who currently do not have any possibility to get involved since they have too much work to do and there are too few of them. And right now what they're doing is just click in the system rather than work with people on a personal basis and conducting interviews with families which are beneficiaries or potential beneficiaries, and on the basis of that they are not finding out what they currently need, and we do not have this at this moment. The system social protection system. It seems that it will go, if the situation continues, it seems that it will go even further than what it is doing right now. So we have obstacles that are put in place. So there is this technological barrier placed in front of the beneficiaries, and it will probably be kept in the future systems. We do not see any moves forward in what the decision makers think is functional and efficient in the public services. If I may add, yes, please. Please add. Well, maybe you can ask the question, and maybe it has something to do with this. Yes, the question is, how can we ensure that those who are responsible should put the quality of data in the first place and include data on marginalized and vulnerable groups? Yes, this is a continuation. I was talking about the possibility to check and about the confidentiality of data. And I also wanted to follow up on what a colleague was saying, and this is partly a response to your question. How can we ensure the normal functioning of the system? And how can we avoid future inequalities, so-called digital inequalities as a result of the use of the system, particularly affecting the elderly, including the poor and persons with disabilities and our citizens who live in substandard settlements. These are usually the Roma people who work in those substandard settlements under the conditions that we should not allow in this century, below the threshold of basic human dignity. And on top of that, they are exposed to another type of discrimination, digital discrimination. In the process of the adoption of the law, we gave our negative opinion on several occasions. And I think that this also applies to A11 and several civil society organizations. They also pointed to those weak points where the violations of the most vulnerable groups may occur. And all our systems should put human beings in the center of attention. And in this case, it turned out that this is not the case, and that nobody is looking after the level of digital literacy of our society. It is rather high if we observe the use of computers and mobile phones, but the fact that you're using a mobile phone or a computer does not mean that you are skilled enough and you have enough literacy to be able to use the advantages that are offered by the digitalization, and that you can use e-administration. We especially talked about that during the COVID-19 pandemic and covered that in a special report on the discrimination against the elderly, which we made in 2020. Or 2021, I don't know. I think it was actually 2021. We made 2 special reports on the discrimination of the elderly and the children. And we said that you cannot disrupt some services. There was some talk about the discontinuation of the service of bringing pensions to the doorstep of the elderly. There are some people who live in some places that are very far or are not too accessible, or they live alone, and they cannot use all those advantages offered by the technical development. And we simply cannot introduce the administration overnight and turn a blind eye to their needs and say that this is a solution to all problems. At the time, somebody said that we are actually impeding the development of the administration and digitalization and the resolution of all problems, because the line ministry at the time told us, the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, was responding to some of our recommendations and initiatives aimed at improving the position of vulnerable groups who will use the social support system, child benefits, etc., that the social card will solve everything, solve all their problems. But actually the situation turned out to be completely the opposite, and this brings us back. I think that Ms. Doskic has come back. This is how we started this Privacy Week, with data protection and discrimination, because usually the violation of the right to data protection is a gateway to discrimination. And some processes have to go simultaneously. We cannot stop the development of technology, but if we're developing the technology and it is our priority, as Vladimir said, then, as the strategy says, I think that its name is the Strategy of Development of Digital Skills, then you should simultaneously work on the development of those digital skills and digital literacy. You cannot focus only on the youngest, because I think that I actually welcome the introduction of the Digital World course, but they would have been digitally literate even without that. We need more focus on the elderly and those who need greater skills, let alone those people who need much more support for overcoming difficulties in life, as our law on social protection says, because they are currently in a situation that they need the social protection support, and in order to get out of that situation and find their way forward. And the response of the system as it is was the worst that we imagined, and the last thing that we wanted in the system, to have AI, and AI which will exclude you from the social benefit system, without giving you this comprehensive support that will ensure that you get out of those difficulties. The social protection system should not only provide the material response, they should also provide you with such a response that will prevent you from getting into those difficulties again once you get out of them, and helping you get out of them, and should prevent the creation of different new problems, because we're now in a situation where numerous, even bigger problems have occurred, and those alleged savings will actually be used for solving the issues that were created. This is not the topic of our panel, but I will end with those words. I've always believed that we've always had to have this flexible approach. I like the idea of the assembly that you mentioned. We should have a system, even before the social card and social benefits, where you will not allow anybody to get into serious problems because they are 100 or 200 and 300 dinars short of being able to get the right to social assistance. Or if they have some land and you're 80 and you cannot produce anything, you cannot get social benefit. This person came to you to ask for assistance, and if they are left out because of 100 dinars, maybe they will resort to alcoholism or will start committing crimes, because we all know that existential needs have to be solved in whatever way.
Ms. Stankovic, I would like to hear your reaction to what our colleagues said in their interventions in the past couple of minutes. And I would like to discuss another thing also with you. We were talking about the need to secure that the government institutions and agencies have enough data on citizens in order to be able to help them, so that social protection and social welfare programs can be comprehensive. But at the same time, we have to think about how to protect personal data from the government, particularly in the situation when citizens' private data, personal data, that can be accessed by government agencies can result in the violation of their rights. So what can the international community do to secure the high level of protection of personal data, and particularly those who are human rights defenders? My first reaction, not a case or not a person to be asked about social security, but there are general lines that we can draw. First and foremost, from the collection of data and creation of data sets, be it for the purposes of social welfare systems or any other field. It's very important how one collected this data, whether they have been sifted through and purified, how much they were. It was tested, and then from what I gathered, there was no testing. Whether the testing was done with the consent of the people in order to eliminate mistakes before you launch a piece of technology. And what you were mentioning here also implies what the OSCE representatives have recommended, and what are regulatory trends in Europe, and that's transparency of algorithms at all levels, from the piece of data through the life cycle of the technology. That's possibility for people who are affected by such technology to know that their data is processed in the first place, to have access to information on how the data is processed. And this is more related to platforms, but I suppose also to government agencies. You can ask for this data to be withdrawn or deleted if the data is not accurate or you don't want this processing to be done. So there are similarities, and I go back again to the need for a higher amount of information and structured analysis about which systems are used in public services, not only in the social protection sphere, but in other public services. People talk a lot about the use of AI in the judiciary, and bearing in mind all the problems that our judiciary is facing in the non-digital world, we need to first eliminate these problems and introducing information coming from the digital world could create new problems. if it's done before these problems with the non-digital world have been solved. And I believe that the state can create more problems if it fails to test the use of data in the fields that can touch upon human rights and individuals' lives. And that was from my knowledge about the social welfare system. And when it comes to the data that is massively, that is collected on a mass scale and processed on a mass scale, that's done by major platforms and systems based on machine learning and artificial intelligence. So, and how to protect the rights of citizens and the rights of activists against abuse. It's a big debate on a global level. You're all aware of that because risks are high. We are faced with this, let's say, fake dilemma, whether you want privacy or you want freedom of assembly, freedom of thought, because they cannot go together. In my view, it's not. This is false. This is not true. It's just a matter of a balance, and it cannot be done by a machine. At the end of the day, you have a person, a human, who has to make an assessment whether there is certain risk, like risk of terrorism, or this use of data is simplifying the work of certain authorities, and platforms can provide this data. Why not? So one has to have the right measure there. So all those who have access to personal data have to be educated, sensitized, digitally literate, of course, but also literate about these basic issues related to human rights, to avoid the things mentioned by Danilo and the Commissioner. And I suppose you asked me about the economy of oversight, and I'm going back to business models. Their business model is based on monitoring huge amount of users' data with unprecedented ways to process this data and to collect this data. And now you have also data mining companies, and I'm sure we have them. There are many of them in the world, and they can earn a lot. These are companies that collect your data that are floating on the internet. They systematize it, collate it, and sell it to whoever is willing to pay for that. So the private sector, unlike the state, is practically totally unregulated and uncontrolled. You have this initiative with GDPR. It is being implemented, but with some problems in Europe. There is still tension with the states whether this regulation and these regulations will be applied, because the main server and main processor are in the States. And the Irish regulator is also important because of the seat of these companies. So their behavior will affect everybody, including Serbia, once they are aligned with these future acts and the GDPR that people are already aligning with. And you have government agencies that are bound by certain international treaties and various policies, but nothing prevents them from going to some brokering companies. And this is something that the OSCE representative for freedom of information has dealt with, because that can have major implications for freedom of information at the level of citizens and at the level of journalists and the media. So because of this deterring effect that the economy of oversight and trade in this data and maybe abuse of this data by government can have on the journalism and media systems and information, due to the danger of events in the online world and effects on physical security of journalists or activists or human rights defenders, because somebody got some data and then ordered your beating or your assassination, and it happened in the world. So there is a whole range of principles. These are not binding regulations, but these are principles suggesting the government's proper behavior to prevent abuses arising from these business models of private stakeholders that can have serious repercussions for human rights. So the first recommendation is for the state, for the states, for the governments to refrain from arbitrary access to big data, and all human rights are protected there, as the rights that are protected in the offline world. So the government has to do the tripartite test. That it has to have, the purpose has to be legally defined, it has to be commensurate, it has to be necessary in a democratic society, and so on and so forth. And the governments are also advised to ban transfer of data to government agencies owned by platforms. And when it comes to law enforcement agencies, they collect data in relation to a specific situation, whenever that is possible, and on the basis of a specific suspicion. That would be grounded suspicion in our case, and I'm not sure to which extent that is acceptable to our law enforcement agencies, but that's a recommendation. One of very important agencies, the government is introducing systems for mass surveillance and massive processing of biometric data collected from that surveillance that can have serious effects for human rights. And this is data, who communicated with whom, when. This is data that is held by the platform or those handling electronic communication, and that in our system it's covered partly by the law on electronic communication. And even if it's not fully implemented, it's there on the paper, and that access can be with all these controls that I mentioned and with full protection. And the recommendation is to criminalize illegal surveillance and to ban the use of evidence collected in that way. And I have some other recommendations about the surveillance by platform, but we can discuss that later. Microphone, please. Microphone, microphone. We have some 15 minutes. I'm sorry, we cannot hear the speaker without the mic. Vladimir?
Sorry, not Vladimir.
Vladim.
Online now? Yes.
Vladim?
Yes, yes. Hello. Hello to every participant. I'm sorry I'm late. I was at a meeting. We are preparing the next plenary. Is just next week. So, my name is Vadim. I work as an administrator in the Secretariat of the Committee on Artificial Intelligence, and I think in a few words I will try to present to you the work that the Council of Europe is leading on creating a legal instrument in an international treaty on AI, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So the process started with the so-called ad hoc committee on artificial intelligence, CAHAI. It started in 2019. It consisted of a wide multi-stakeholder consultation, which included many different actors, including universities, NGOs, and of course, governments. And during the studies that were carried out, the committee adopted the feasibility study, and also at the end of the CAHAI, the committee adopted the possible elements of legal framework on artificial intelligence, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So the next body, the one that succeeded CAHAI, was the Committee on Artificial Intelligence. It is the body that is functioning right now. And its task is to actually negotiate a convention. So what needs to be said is that the process is ongoing, and the process involves, apart from all the member states of the Council of Europe, countries like United States, Canada, Israel, Japan. So it is a global process. Right now, the first week, the second week of January, we had the third plenary meeting of the committee. During this meeting, the committee started negotiating one of the chapters of the convention. So the drafting group created within the committee finished working on the text of the final clauses of the convention. And also the committee examined the draft methodology for risk and impact management of AI systems from the point of view of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, Vladimir, a quick question for you.
Maybe, again, what I will say very generally is that the convention, the planned convention, will be a high-level instrument the idea is to ensure proper seamless complementarity with the already existing human rights instruments for each of the parties, future parties. The next idea is to try to establish certain general principles regarding design, development, and application of artificial intelligence systems. And these are the ideas that were really well thought through during the CAHAI process, addressing such issues with AI as, protection from discrimination, the idea of accountability, transparency, the idea, of legal liability, responsibility, and general accountability for AI systems. And then jumping off this, and this is the planned convention would likely have something like a separate chapter on this. The idea of procedural guarantees for what we call AI subjects, people affected by decisions or just application of AI systems. So the idea of procedural safeguards or procedural protection would include certain rights, and this is under discussion. And again, the idea is to try to address the problem, the well-known problem of information asymmetry that arises when AI systems are used.
Perfect. Vladimir, thank you very much. I'm
People
not sure
affected
if you can
by
hear me. Vladimir.
AI, the functioning of AI systems, do not necessarily understand how the system works, which makes it difficult to challenge its application.
Perfect. Vladimir, thank you very much. Htio bih sada posljednjih nekoliko minuta.
Now I would like to use the last couple of minutes to open this discussion to the audience and to see whether there are any questions from the audience for our speakers.
Dobar dan, hvala vam.
Good morning, thank you. I was a bit late, but the part that I heard was very important to me. I'm sorry that we did not have a representative of the Council of Europe from the very beginning to be able to listen to what is going on at the international level. On the basis of everything that we talked about since the first day, and as the Commissioner said, we started with some initial information about the implementation of the law on the social card. My impression is that we still do not have, not enough, but any information at all about how it is implemented in the private and public sector in order to have all the information that are needed by the independent authorities and the civil sector in order to control. And without this law on the social card, unfortunately, we would have been in an even worse situation. What the law has done is that everything that we were talking about in the previous years, about the discrimination, about the negative effects on human rights, where we pointed to the examples from comparative practice, and we heard the Dutch example. Only now do we have a tangible example in Serbia where we can use some specific data to be able to talk to our legislators and to inform them about the negative effects. Unfortunately, we had to learn about this the hard way on our own example. And I think that what A11 is extremely important. They are testing all the legal mechanisms for the testing of all those systems and understanding all information about how algorithm works. This is not a question, but I think that this is very important for everything that we will continue doing in this field. Danila, no pressure, but all eyes are turned to you, of course, to the Commissioner for the Protection Against Discrimination and for Personal Data Protection. The person who is speaking does not know how to use the Excel spreadsheet, so you probably know how this will look like, what this would look like. I don't know what to say, really. We learned from this example, and the system will always learn and introduce new technologies who cannot oppose it. So imagine any situation in which there was a general population and somebody revoked some of their rights because something came up. There would not be a revolution, but we would have much serious problems. What is going on right now is a process that is going below the radar, and all the violations of rights that we're talking about and that we are trying to systematize are occurring as we speak. Somebody is solving a problem with a notification right now and nobody knows anything about this. So it's good to talk about this in order to make people hear about this and improve our experience in cooperation with all the authorities and all the institutions or organizations that can help in order to find who is responsible for the situation, because it's incredible to commission such a system without checking what its effects will be. And now you're even boasting with the results, which are highly questionable. Some of the data cannot even be checked. But let's not go into those details. Well, thank you for being a part of this story that we're working on together. We had meetings in late November. We will continue with meetings, and there's no way other than continuing in that direction. Brankica? We don't want to miss this part. We had some data that we presented from the global level. Preparing for the OSCE conference, I presented some data. We know that private companies are developing their internal procedures and models for the elimination of prejudice and discrimination. But it's not easy because you need to put things into context and understand the situation. This cannot be done without human beings. So we go back to the fact that human beings are the key. So maybe it's even good. Well, this sounds disastrous that this happened. This sounds disastrous because people do not get their benefits. But I'm trying to find the best explanation for what has happened to us. It's difficult to learn from other people's examples. It would be difficult for us, for example, from our perspective, to take the Dutch example and analyze it. We would have to know the entire system and the entire context, and we would need an expert for that. But we now have the opportunity to do something together. A11 is here, and Danilo's entire team, and we are here. We are working on this together. We're working on using one of the mechanisms of protection, in this case the protection from discrimination. We are working on some cases. Of course, the laws do not allow us to talk about those cases right now. It's not that we do not trust you, all of you who are our partners, but cooperation is key. We couldn't do anything without cooperation with the CSOs, with all stakeholders, and we wouldn't be able to do anything without the will and a wish to solve everything. We've mentioned different countries, Holland, Finland, for example, which was mentioned before. There is not a single case where a single authority solved everything, where civil society organizations were not involved, or at least two authorities, usually commissioners for equality and EPAs, or in some cases I think that the Finnish Ministry of Justice was even involved, one of the ministries. So there has to be coordination, constant improvement of knowledge, and ensuring that we have a system and procedures for controlling and supervising the implementation of AI. When Nadia was talking, I became pessimistic. When she was talking about the use of some legal mechanisms to have principles that would ensure that the state refrains from this and that. And it's, I almost laughed because it looks like it's Monday, you want to be on diet, and there are all sorts of cookies in front of you. So the state has to refrain from doing something, and it's a matter of 2 clicks to do it. So I'm not too optimistic about this. This does not refer only to our country, I think, our state. I think that we're lagging behind enormously, lagging behind the digital community enormously. It has gone too far. Like law is always lagging behind life. Previously, some offense occurred, and then we sat down and created a norm solving this issue. But now we're lagging so much that I don't know if we will be able to have a new legal norm that will solve issues so well that if another thing occurs, we will have a framework for protection. Maybe I should not live on a pessimistic note, but my will for future fight has not left me. We're going all the way to Strasbourg, so we do not want to stop learning about protection and applying protection in order to get justice. And I know that Danilo shares the same view regardless of Excel spreadsheets, and Sanya. What do you mean conclusion? Instead of a conclusion, tell us something optimistic. Well, I'd prefer to give you food for thought and for work. We are yet to see the law on AI. And as you know, the strategy that was developed by the technological sector. When the action plan was developed, the circle of those people was made a bit broader, but not enough. When the guidelines were made, the commissioner was involved and several organizations, but not the Commissioner for the Protection of Discrimination, not the Ministry of Information, which is very important because of everything that we have been talking about. So we should probably ask some questions, make connections, and start preparing for the drafting of this law. That should really, because of everything that we were talking about, should involve all the stakeholders in the society. And let me follow up on the soft laws and wide norms that was mentioned by the Commissioner. We always have our Constitution and the Convention on Fundamental Human Rights, which I think that if there is enough goodwill, the interpretation can be wide enough as to ensure the protection of rights and the establishment of competencies. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us, and until the next discussion. Thank you.
So thank you all for following us in the previous days, for being with us, following all the panels and the event. I hope that you got some answers to your dilemmas and questions about privacy, and I hope that you are now more convinced how important privacy and protection of personal data is important. And our program was entitled Privacy is the Heart of the Freedom, and that's actually like that. See you next year. Goodbye.